Hello and welcome to our webinar. My name is Karen Righthand. I am the Managing Director of Corporate Sales and Marketing at SCS, and I'm happy to welcome you all to this webinar today. Just want to cover a few little housekeeping items before we get started. I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and thank you to all of our valued customers who are attending and may be new to Report Assurance. I would like to tell everyone that the presentation is being recorded and the recording will be provided to each of you after the webinar via email. Please type your questions as they come up into the question box and we will take questions after the presentation. We're planning on roughly 30 minutes of presentation and about 15 minutes of questions and answers. We'll try to get everyone's questions answered, and if we have to take some offline, we'll be happy to do that. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Neil Mendenhall is our Director of Service Development at SCS. He has 15 years of experience auditing to sustainability standards that span multiple industries, including forestry, agriculture, biofuels, building materials, electronics, and mining. Neil is an AA1000 certified sustainability assurance practitioner, and you'll learn more about what that is as we get into the material here. Amber Valles is our program manager for jewelry and precious metals at SCS. Her work primarily focuses on managing and conducting audits for mineral supply chains in accordance with ISSA 3000. And most notably, she works with the London Bullion Market Association, LBMA, and the London Palladium and Platinum Market, LPPM. She's based in Los Angeles. Neil's based out of our home office here in the Bay Area, California. And that is pretty much what I have. So I'd like to turn it over to them and I will come back at the end and moderate the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. This is Neil Mendenhall and I'm going to kick this thing off here. Today we're talking about sustainability report assurance to two different standards, the AA1000 assurance standard and the ISSA 3000 standard. The agenda is going to cover the following items: a little bit about SCS's background and qualification, what is report assurance, what are the objectives, why you should get it, how it's related to frameworks such as GRI, SASB, and IR, and then go into the main standards themselves, AA1000 and ISSA 3000. Then answer some questions about when you might be ready for report assurance and how you start. And then we'll show a couple examples of typical assurance services and answer any questions at the end. So a little bit about SCS. We're a global leader in third-party sustainability verification, certification, auditing, and standards development. We've been around for 36 years, really focused on sustainability and food safety. We are an AA1000 licensed assurance practitioner. Our license is there in the upper right-hand corner. Our staff that are on assurance engagements are licensed by and trained, I should say, by licensed AA1000 training firms. And our auditors under the ISSA 3000 standards are trained by accounting professionals, as that is an accounting standard. So sustainability assurance, what is it? Essentially, it's answering two important questions for your stakeholders. Are you, as a reporting organization, reporting on the right issues? And is the information you're reporting right? So this is what stakeholders want to know. They want to know that what you're providing them isn't just some glossy marketing piece, that it really covers the right issues and the information reporting is correct. The diagram below is a typical grid you see in a sustainability report that places topics by their level of importance or materiality. both to stakeholders and their significance of impact, which the upper right-hand quadrant would be the most material topics or the most impactful sustainability topics. So as part of an assurance engagement, there's going to be a defined scope. So we're going to know, as the assurance practitioner, we're going to need to know what parts of the company are included. Is it just certain sites or certain regions, or is it the entire organization? We're going to define a time period. Usually this is a calendar or fiscal year, depending on how the company wants to report. The assurance professionals will be looking at both quantitative and qualitative assertions that are reported. And we'll be looking at gathering evidence to support our findings and conclusions at the end. The gathering of evidence includes interviews with management and relevant stakeholders. These could be internal and external stakeholders. We'll conduct document review. Those documents will usually include your policies, procedures, work instructions, and any communication with stakeholders and records. We'll also do data sampling. So we're not going to, recalculate everything, but we'll take samples of data and recalculate them. And if those look correct, we'll assume that the broader calculations are accurate. The final deliverables are a report to management. This is usually a confidential internal report that has the full list of findings, even ones that were corrected during the process, and areas for improvement. And then there's an external assurance statement that usually is included in the sustainability report itself. It's a few pages at the end and signed by the assurance practitioners. So, why get report assurance? The main reason these days is investors, quite honestly. Investors are more and more asking for information that they're being provided to be assured. And this is because they and other stakeholders want to know that the information that is being provided is both relevant and accurate. And it provides them with a better understanding of the sustainability risks related to your company so they can make better decisions. It also can help the company themselves understand their sustainability risks, because through the process, we may discover certain gaps or areas of improvement that once these things are addressed, you may find out that what you thought was a minor risk is a higher risk. It also increases ratings with ESG rating agencies. So, many of you may be reporting to CDP or be on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And then there's specific ESG rating agencies like MSCI, Bloomberg, Sustainalytics. There's a number of them. And they rate your companies based on the information that they can get both from surveys and your sustainability report itself, and give you a rating for investors to see and then make more informed decisions about their investments. If you are providing third-party independent assurance, they are therefore more convinced that the information you're providing is more accurate, and so your score goes up essentially. So the standards we're talking about today, A1000 and ISSA 3000, they're lesser known. You may have seen them with CDP and some of these other ESG rating agencies saying, we recognize these standards and we want you to get assured to one of these. But the ones that you're probably more familiar with are GRI, Global Reporting Index, and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the Internet, and the integrated reporting frameworks. So these GRI, SASB, and IR frameworks, these are standards for reporting. So how do I go about presenting my sustainability information in accordance with these reporting frameworks? GRI tells you what all the disclosures that you should be reporting on need to look like, and how your report should be set up, and how to do materiality, that kind of thing. Those are the standards that you would follow in your report. The assurance standards themselves, A1000 and the 3000 standard, those are the standards that we follow to conduct our assurance of the sustainability information you're providing. So that's how they're related. They're slightly different and apply to different types of organizations. And as a part of the scope, it's not always included, but as a part of the scope of your assurance engagement, we can include your adherence to GRI or SASB or integrated reporting, in addition to looking at the specific KPIs that you're reporting under those frameworks. So the main assurance standards used today and most widely recognized by the important stakeholders are this accountabilities AA1000 assurance standard. They're now on version 3 that was just released this year. It was developed by Accountability, which is a UK-based nonprofit. It was really the first of its kind when it was released first back in 1999. Today, it's a part of a larger suite of sustainability standards, and those are some other standards that might be of interest to people on this webinar. There's a principles standard. The latest one came out in 2018. It tells you how to meet the 4 core accountability sustainability principles. And then there's also a stakeholder engagement standard. It's from 2015, still very relevant. They're going to come out with an update soon. This standard, I really recommend for any company that's struggling with how to best do their stakeholder engagement. It really has a lot of information on how to best engage with stakeholders for being a more sustainable organization. And I'll let Amber go over the ISSA 3000 information here.
Thanks, Neil. So second here is the International Standard on Assurance Engagement, or ISSA 3000. ISSA 3000 was developed by the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, or IAASB, to enhance the role, relevancy, and quality of assurance engagements. The ISSA 3000 standard was designed for use by professional accountants to review non-financial historical information in their engagements, but although the standard was designed for accountants by accountants, it can be used by any assurance provider. And this meets accountability expectations of transparency, responsiveness, and compliance. So if you can go to the next slide here.
Yep. And so the objectives of an assurance practitioner such as SCS or others is basically what we want to do is we want to assess the organization's adherence to, if you're using AA1000, we're going to look at your adherence to the accountability principles. These principles I'll go over in a little more detail shortly, but essentially they're the principles of inclusivity, materiality, responsiveness, and impact. Again, this is only for the AA1000, but for both standards, we would be trying to make a reasonable or high level of assurance or a limited or moderate level of assurance about whether the subject matter is free of misstatement, material misstatement. So essentially, we're looking at the information provided and making sure that it is correct. And if not, we provide gaps or areas of improvement, and oftentimes those can be corrected prior to the final report and statement, leading to still having a positive statement at the end. And again, that positive statement comes from us expressing our conclusion regarding the outcome of the evaluation on the information that we looked at. So the AA1000 assurance standard, there's 2 types of engagements under this assurance standard. Type 1 is the assurance provider just looking at the company's adherence to those 4 principles of accountability. A type 2 engagement includes both the assessment against the 4 principles of accountability, plus looking at specific performance criteria, KPIs or indicators or disclosures that you're putting out in your report. And those can be defined as part of the scope. We don't have to look at everything. We can just focus on certain things that you want assured. There are 2 levels of assurance. There's a moderate and high level. The moderate level is a little less in depth. We'll be gathering more aggregated information and looking for any obvious signs of error. We'll be gathering information directly from the company, typically managers and key process owners. Whereas higher level of assurance, we're going to dig deeper. We're going to go to original data and do more recalculations to make sure that the information from the different sites is being rolled up and accurately aggregated at the corporate level. And we may even go to outside stakeholders to get a different perspective on whether that information provided is accurate. AA1000 allows us to assure economic and forward-looking claims. This is different from the accounting standard, which just looks at historical, non-financial data. The standard is really best used for companies sort of that are pretty advanced in their reporting and have been publishing an annual sustainability report for a couple of years, just primarily because the requirement that we need to audit them to those 4 principles. And those 4 principles are the following: inclusivity. This is saying that, you know, the people who are impacted should have a say in the decisions of the company's operations. Then there's materiality, which says that the decision makers should identify and be clear about the sustainability topics that matter. So that's that grid that I showed you at the beginning. You know, are we did we go through a good process of identifying what are our major impacts, and, you know, making sure that we're reporting on those and not, you know, missing one. And then the responsiveness principle, which is organizations need to act transparently on material sustainability topics and their impacts. So this is really about being honest with your stakeholders. And sometimes, you know, it even says about areas where you need to, you need to be approving. If you're glossing over in your report some major impacts you're having on the environment, that would be not being very responsible to your stakeholders and responsive. So you can still be honest, but then say that you've set goals for improvement. And then the last one in the middle there is impact. And organizations need to monitor and measure their impacts and be accountable to them. This standard was just updated this year, and it's now mandatory for use for any reports that come out in 2021. It includes the new impact principle that was just added in 2018. So it talks about how we assess that principle. And it has more updated preconditions for us as the practitioners, which is more aligned with a lot of the focus of the ISSA E3000 standard, which really focused on integrity, objectivity, professional competence, due care, and confidentiality and professional behavior. So this is just making sure that your assurance provider, you know, meets these. It specifically allows for assurance of information outside of a standard report. The original version of this standard was really meant for a standalone sustainability report, and that's really all this standard was supposed to assure. But now there's an allowance for us as a practitioner to assure information that's specifically going to a specific stakeholder. So a CDP, questionnaire, or parts of your sustainability information that's presented on a website, for example, which might be outside of your standard report. And it also allows for assurance of forward-looking information, which is a departure from the accounting standard that only looks at historical information. Amber?
All right, so for ISA 3000, by definition, this standard only assures historical claims of non-financial information. There's no requirement to ensure that the topics assessed in your assurance engagement are material unless it's part of the assurance scope. So for example, if your company is completing an assurance engagement to meet GRI requirements. Under the ISA 3000, there are 2 levels of assurance that a client can choose from: reasonable and limited assurance. And the main difference between the two is the assurance confidence that you're looking for. So reasonable assurance translates into a more extensive engagement. And I'd like to spotlight here that ISA 3000 is good for companies that may not meet all 4 AA 1000 principles and only want to assure specific non-financial sustainability disclosures. So ISA 3000 can be used beyond report assurance. It can be used for specific stakeholder disclosure assurance topics, such as non-financial performance or conditions. For example, looking at a company's key indicators of efficiency and effectiveness. It can be used to look at systems and processes, like a company's internal control system. And it can also be used for company behavior, so looking at corporate governance, compliance with regulation, or greenhouse gas reporting. SCS uses ISA 3000 as part of environmental, social, and governance assurance engagements, as well as our approved responsible sourcing services with the London Bullion Market Association and the London Platinum and Palladium Market. The LBMA and LPPM, they require their members to complete annual assurance engagements that indicate compliance with their responsible sourcing standards. And when an ISA 3000 engagement is done, the deliverable includes an assurance statement on LBMA or LPPM refiners' annual Step 5 due diligence report. I will say, just one point on that is that the ISA 3000 assurance engagement style is becoming more and more popular in my field of work, the metals industry, as supply chain actors from mine to refiner to manufacturers aim to comply with due diligence standards. So now let's discuss preparing for an assurance engagement. Here are some listed prereqs that I'll run through. First, you need buy-in from top management in your company for your sustainability program and the assurance process. Second, a materiality assessment must be completed to identify material topics that have been vetted by stakeholders. So this is something internally that your company does. Third, you have management systems in place for each material topic and corresponding disclosure. So this includes anything like standardized policies, procedures, work instructions, risk assessments, or any training that's done. ISO 14001 and 45001 management systems are a great example, but they're not required. Fourth, you have evidence of how you calculate or estimate baseline and annual data for most material topics, and all of which you will be getting assured. And then lastly, for high or reasonable levels of assurance, you have to be ready to provide site level records and other evidence from which corporate level data is kept.
Okay, thanks, Amber. So, the question is then, where do we start? We just provided you with a lot of information, but essentially, the first steps for reporting, as we've discussed before, is really to get a handle on your material topics. So conducting that materiality assessment. If you haven't conducted that, or if you're wondering where to even start, there are SASB industry standards that can be downloaded from their website, and they're based on the types of industries that you might be in. And they've already done an assessment or surveys of the industry to try and, figure out what the most material topics are. Now, the issue with these and why a full materiality assessment is better is because every company is a little bit different, and some span multiple industry standards under SASB. And so you still are going to have to look at what SASB provides and make sure that those are relevant for your company and your external stakeholders. But it's a good place to start, just to take a look at what you probably should be reporting or what others in your industry are reporting. And then first steps for assurance. Really, you can start with assuring just the most material KPIs the first year. So some companies just start out with, I report to CDP, I'd like to improve my score. I want to, do scope 1 and 2 and get those assured. And then you can expand from there. Other companies prefer to conduct a pre-assurance engagement, and that's, we're not sure we're ready. We know if we go straight to a report assurance, we're going to get a statement at the end, and we're not positive that the final outcome will be positive. And so they'll conduct a pre-assurance engagement just to get familiar with the process in that first year, and then better prepare for the following year, identify gaps where they can make improvements in their management systems, and be ready for assurance the following year. So here's the typical types of assurance services that utilize the standards that we talked about today. This pre-assurance engagement that I just mentioned, essentially this is a preliminary scope of work for a company to understand their gaps and make improvements. And the deliverable is essentially a confidential report to management, which identifies those gaps and opportunities for improvement. Sustainability report assurance here, this is usually a 3 to 6 month engagement. Believe it or not, and the reason for that is that it's a process. We don't wait till your final report's done. We want to know early on how your systems are in place for gathering information, and we can provide you with findings early on that can be corrected prior to the final report and still get a positive statement at the end. There's also in the deliverables, there's a 1 to 3 page on average assurance statement that goes in the back of your report, signed by the assurance practitioner that some of your stakeholders are looked for. And then there's still a confidential report to management, and that confidential report to management will include all the findings along the way, even the ones that were corrected. The final assurance statement doesn't have any of the ones that were corrected later. It just has any outstanding opportunities for improvement listed. And then the last one here is specific stakeholder disclosure assurance. So this would be, you're responding to a CDP request, or you have a RobocoSAM survey for, your listing on Dow Jones Sustainability Index, or EcoVadis, or any of these rating agencies may have sent you a questionnaire. You can just get the information that you're providing to them outside of a sustainability report assured and get a statement from us and a report to management just for that information. Just to kind of give you some examples, these are from publicly available sustainability reports that we've done. So there's one for Owens Corning or sorry, this is for HP, but here's sort of the assurance statement that's in their report. So, it says it's an independence assurance statement to Owens Corning stakeholders. It describes the scope, the standards that we use, the team, methodology, the limitations of the assurance, what the final conclusions are. And again, so this is to the AA1000 standard. So we go into detail about how the company meets each of the individual principles. And then final observations, recommendations, and our license there. This is an assurance engagement to the 3000 standard. It's a little bit different. It includes much of the same information, however, and then in addition, it can go into the actual specific criteria that we assured. So these tables can be included under either standard, but this is just a slightly different format. And that basically concludes our presentation today. And at this point, Karen's going to open it up for any questions that came in or any questions that people have now that we're at the end. So thank you very much for your time, and we welcome questions.
Thank you, Neil and Amber. Yes, we do have a few questions, and I welcome anyone to please type their question into the question box. So one of the questions is, in your experience, how have companies started with assurance? And that's kind of a broad question. I mean, one of the things that I can add to that is that I think it really depends on what you're wanting to say to the marketplace. I mean, there are many people that do verification for their greenhouse gas inventory. So when they report to CDP, and then they can start to sort of branch out from there. So that's one pathway I've seen. And then certainly with Amber's programs, the London bullion and palladium and platinum markets, it's pretty much required, I believe. But Amber and Neil, do either of you have other experiences about how companies have gotten started to share?
Yeah, I think I mentioned some of those towards the end, but there's this pre-assurance to just kind of understand areas of improvement in your reporting according to the assurance standard. So it's a really good way to understand those gaps. And then again, you can just focus, like you said, Karen, on specific KPIs that stakeholders may ask for assurance on, and not try and assure your entire sustainability report right out of the gate. That
was kind of another question I had is, do you have to jump right in and assure your entire sustainability report, or can you sort of incrementally?
Yeah, so that's true. You can incrementally, and we have clients that have just started with a couple of KPIs that we assured to the 3000 standard, and then over time kept growing, and they're like, at this point, we should just assure our whole report. And then we actually moved them over to the AA1000 standard, assured them to all the principles and overall to their whole report. We didn't audit every single thing, but we do it by sample. And then they asked us to specifically call out specific key performance indicators that stakeholders wanted, additional assurance on. And then they even went to high levels of assurance on some of those. So you can mix and match this, any way you want. And we have, there's a solution by using either one of these standards and high and low levels of assurance. You can kind of pick and choose what you want in the scope, and that'll all be, listed in the ultimate report and assurance statement. So it's clear to all stakeholders exactly what was in scope.
Perfect. And here's the question. I don't know if we know the answer to, but if we don't, we can find out. But how do the new ISO standards around assurance processes fit with the standards you've discussed today, specifically ISO 17029 and updated ISO 14065?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about this. The 14065, that's for greenhouse gas, if I'm correct. That can be used specifically for the greenhouse gas inventory. And so there are other standards. So for example, that 14,000 standard for greenhouse gas emissions, you can use that standard for reporting your scope 1 to greenhouse gas emissions, and then we use that standard as well to make sure you follow that. So you can think of as some of those are specific standards. You know, the GRI standard is specific for the reporting framework. There's a greenhouse gas emission standard that is specific to your greenhouse gas emissions, and you're using those, and we can include those in the scope. And so we'll look at those standards as well as a part of the overall assurance process, if that's in scope. And so think of this assurance standard as sort of the meta process, the meta standard we use for looking at all of your reporting, which specific KPIs may be to other very specific standards.
Right, got it. Okay, how would you find a licensed practitioner, or how do you look up if your provider is licensed?
There's a licensing program under accountability. So you can go to accountability.org, I believe, and you can go and see who the licensed providers are. They even have the fully trained assurance practitioners listed by name on there. So if you really want to check out, you can go make sure your provider is listed for AA1000 and has a license. They should be able to provide that to you if you ask. And then you can see if the staff working on your assurance have been properly trained there. For the accounting standard, the 3000 standard, it's really written for accountants. Anyone can assure to that as long as they're qualified and have systems in place for being independent, and that their auditors are well trained. And that's just a training that you can get from professional accounting professionals.
So how many, I think you talked about a little bit in the presentation about how long it takes to conduct an assurance engagement, but I think it's, from my perspective as the person that scopes and works with companies to get engaged in this process, it really depends on, you know, how much you're assuring, I think. But what are some kind of ideas of how long these take to conduct, and when should people, you know, start thinking about this? So I guess that's a kind of a two-part question. So if you're going to publish your sustainability report at the end of Q1 or early Q2, you know, what should you be thinking about now?
Yeah, I touched on this before, but you know, and a lot of people think, oh, you can't start until our report is done. Well, by the time your report's done, you want to release it. You don't want to wait for this whole assurance process to go through. And you really miss out on the value add of the process, really. We should start as soon as possible. In fact, we probably should start in Q4 of the previous year, and we can already start looking at your management systems and your processes. You could even provide us with the first half of the year of your data to see if there's any issues with it. And then we can get back to you sometimes before the end of that reporting year with issues that we've identified. And then that can help you go back, fix those issues, improve upon those management systems, recalculate some of your data. So when your report is ready, and the data tables are all filled out. The information there is already accurate. You don't have to wait for us to go through the process until after your report's done. So it really makes sense to start earlier to get the full value, of the process.
Right, and I mean, the deliverable is the assurance statement, so that's, you're going to want that to be in your report. And so I think kind of looking backward from when you're, and oftentimes the sustainability directors and managers are told by the marketing department when that's going to happen, and so you have to kind of work backwards from there. Amber, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say it might actually differ by industry because it's very different for the types of clients I work with. We're normally looking at an audit period of 12 months, and they need that amount of data in order for their assurance engagement to happen. So usually we recommend no later than 3 months after that audit period, you would be contacting SES to do your engagement. But I think it just varies, again, by industry.
Okay, and then for ISSA 3000, if it's for metals and mining, like for LBMA or LPPM, like how long do those engagements usually last?
So the engagement can be anywhere from like a couple days to a week or even more. It just depends on the size of the company that's being or that's part of the engagement, and sometimes there are branches, right, that are also under the assurance engagement. So it really depends on the size of the client and the scope of the audit ultimately.
Right, I would say that's very true of A1000 as well. Okay, well, that seems to be the questions that we have. I'm opening it up if anyone else has got any additional questions. If you want to just type it in the box there, we can take another minute or two, but I want to take this opportunity to again thank Neil and Amber for preparing this presentation. It's very detailed and kind of meant to be just a bit of a, assurance 101. This is a relatively new sustainability field, and we are seeing it grow by leaps and bounds. So we're happy to talk to you about it anytime. And we will be sharing the recording of this presentation after we process it and sending it out via email. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.